Other than his family, I had the good fortune of knowing Gary Sweigart longer than anyone else on the face of this earth. That was 45 years I knew this man. What I'd like to do this morning is just share just a few of the stories that form the tapestry of my life, and then summarize what I think each and every one of us today can take away and live our lives and help us in the way that Gary Sweigart did. I know as we gather together this morning to celebrate the life of a great man, we mourn his passing. We mourn his passing as a beloved son, beloved husband, a father, perhaps a brother, an uncle, a colleague, and a coach. Many of us have known Gary by many names. I want to recite a few, and maybe one of them will ring a bell with you. You may have just called him Gary. Perhaps you would have called him Boss. I know the people sitting up on the second row, they made him known him as G, or one of my favorites, G Money. There was Big Man, there was Swag, there was Swaggy, there was Swag Daddy, and the two I called him for the last 25 years, there was Harold and there was Hark. But I think if we look inside each one of us today, the one word that comes to mind that each of us can think of when they think of Gary, and that is simply friend. If Gary Sweigart was your friend, you had a friend indeed. I had a friend for 46 years. I got it. I met Gary Sweigart 46 years ago in the American Legion Hall, Richmond, Indiana. My dad was a preacher of the Church of the Open Door, and we were meeting in there as he's between actual buildings. Now, Gary had been to the church about 2 weeks before. We were about the same age, and I know what Miss Barb and my mom were trying to get us together. This is the only time in my life I ever saw Gary Sweigart shy. So finally one day, after the service, we met over by a coat rack. And I said, hi. And he went, hi. and then we found a cigar that was laying there on the floor. And Gary kicked it towards me. I kicked it back at him, and it was on because he was going to see if he could kick it further than I did. So I kicked it further, and ended up going down the steps, and we started crushing it. From then on, we've been kicking it for 46 years. Gary lived in Newcastle, I lived in Richmond. We'd see each other on Sundays. I'd go over his house after church, eat his mom's chili, the best in the world. And I had one of my best friends was living in another town. For 6 years we did that. I'd go over his house in the summer, meet his Newcastle friends, and every now he'd come over and I'd introduce him to my friends. I couldn't wait to show them my friend. I was just going to show him off because I was so proud of him. Then in 8th grade, it happened. Gary moved to Richmond. He didn't only move to Richmond, he moved 5 houses down from me. My life changed forever, and so did a few other people in this room, I can promise you that. I was excited for Gary to meet all my friends, but I was thinking about this the other day. I think more importantly, I was subconsciously excited for him to meet my teachers. Because Gary had a whole different agenda when we got to school than the teachers did, and I was looking forward to the ride. So for the next 5 years, we attended school together, and I'll touch on that in just a few minutes. But those 5 years, we played baseball, basketball, and football, everything together. We were on the same team. When he moved in at 14, I'd never been on a winning baseball team. He got to our team, and we instantly became a winner because he was a talented athlete. He had the best hand-eye coordination. He couldn't jump, run, but he had hand-eye coordination. And he brought enthusiasm to our team and direction. We had a coach, his name was Dick Boddicker. He went on to be a state senator. I can remember Gary, it was almost like girls softball, how they do these chants. Well, he got up in front of us, he goes, hey, this is going to be our chant. And it simply went like this: Dick, but Dicker. Dick, Dick, but Dicker. D-I-C-K, B-O-D-I-C-K-E-R. So that's what we did all season. We got out there and chanted Dick, Dick, but Dicker. We ran the table. But make no mistake, basketball was Gary's game, as was it, except for John Charleston, who was the quarterback of the football team. It was everybody's game growing up in Indiana in the late 70s and 80s. And Gary was a shooter. He had this nasty jumper, and he could shoot. And we didn't have a three-point line back then. If it would, he would want to put one out there and make it a four-point line. Now, Gary, I like basketball. I always say, Gary, you know, part of basketball is defense and rebounding, not just shooting. So I tried to get that across to him all the time. Matter of fact, I think it was John Charles that called him the black hole, because if you passed him the ball, it wasn't coming back out. I remember 8th grade basketball. It's a great story about Gary. We were playing Hibbert, who was probably the best junior high in the city, and Pleasant View had rarely ever beaten them. And we'd beaten them at our place, so they were laying in wait for us when we came back to Hibbert. It was a good game. It was close. We were down 15, maybe 2 minutes ago, so the coach took out all the starters. I was already out because I was usually the 6th man. I was sitting there. It was Bill Stevens. He yelled down to the manager, hey, bring me the shot chart. So he got the shot chart, and he started looking at it. He was doing this. He had Gary sitting beside him. He looked at Gary, he said, Gary, do you realize that you were 4 for 21 from the field today? What do you have to say about that? As only Gary could. Gary looked right at him and said, Coach, I see you have the shot chart. You'll see I made my last shot. If you put me back in, I think I can shoot us back into this game. 10th grade basketball. I became the manager, and Gary played on the JV team. Had a new coach. His name was Ron Klinsky. He was only there because his brother was the football coach. He went on to become a great coach in high school basketball at Anderson, all-time winning, took his team to the state finals a couple times. That first year, he didn't have a clue. His whole coaching philosophy was yell at Sweigart. Didn't matter what was going to happen, he was going to yell at Sweigart because he knew Gary could take it. There was one game Gary never even played. He snatched him up in the locker room and yelled at him. He thought that was the best thing, but Gary took it in stride. Then there's Logansport. 3-hour bus ride to Logansport. Gary hadn't gotten the game, and the great thing about me as the manager, I love basketball, and I'd watch all the games on TV, and I hear everything, Al McGuire, and everybody said so. I tell the coach, hey coach, we thought about doing this so I could get players in. Gary hadn't been in, he looked at me, he goes, get me in, boss. I was like, all right. So I said to Klinsky, I was like, hey, I think we need some rebounding. Why don't we put 6'4" Sweigart in and see if he can get us some rebounds? So he calls Gary down. Sweigart, come here. Gary comes down, kneels like that little dog beside its owner, beside things like, Sweigart, we need rebounding. Whatever you do, rebound and do not shoot the ball. I got you, coach. Logansport had the ball. They went down. Shot was missed. We got the rebound. G got out on the break, got the ball about 35 feet out on the wing, and he rose. And if the ball got anything, it was the front of the paint. Within 12 seconds, he was sitting by me on the bench. And Klinsky just looked at him and put his hands up, and he said, hey, shoot or shoot. I got to tell the high jump bar story, I'm sorry. Bear with me. JV baseball, our practice field was at the high school where they had track and everything else going on. And Gary, he was just, we're not going to be bored. So while everybody else was over there doing something, he was going to go over to the high jump bar with a couple of his buddies and see how high he could jump. And as I told you, it wasn't very high. They didn't stop Gary for trying or spouting off like he could really do it. So he tried a few times, probably to clear 4 foot, and he broke the bar. Snapped it in half. Your largeness. And he soon found out those bars were like $300. Boy, old Coach Carl Rooster Harris, he was pissed. He called the whole team together. Martin, I think you were there that day. And he said, he made us all get there. He's like, I told you, He goes, all right, I got the punishment for you. Here's what's going to happen. You all are going to run 1.5 miles, and Sweigart, you're going to sit there and you're going to watch him. Now, that would be a good punishment for most people. Didn't work with Gary. As soon as Carl turned his back, we were all running. Gary's out there motioning at us, doing everything, just having a blast. Came back, everybody's tired. Carl Harris thinks that everybody's going to be upset with Gary. He's like, Gary, what do you have to say for yourself? I said, well, Coach, he said, if I knew you were going to make him run 1.5 miles for breaking a bar, he goes, I'd have broke both of them, they could have run 3 miles. I think you can learn about Gary Sweigart.